Hey folks, I'm International Master Kostya Kavutskiy, and a couple weeks ago I made a video on April Fool's Day about how to follow top chess tournaments. Now that video was actually a prank. It was meant to be funny, but the issue was that a lot of people actually they took it as a genuine, sincere video, and then there was a lot of comments and I got a lot of messages on like, thanks for the video, and they weren't realizing that actually it was quite sarcastic, the whole thing, and not to be taken seriously. And I think that was my fault. I made it a little bit too subtle in terms of what I was trying to achieve. But I wanted to make this video today to show you guys how you should actually follow top chess tournaments. Now the main difference being was in the previous video, I focused a lot on the computer evaluation. And the point is that the computer evaluation, knowing what it is in a specific position, it actually just doesn't help your chess at all. It literally does nothing for you. Now, it's fun to know when the top players have blundered. When Carlsen blunders a piece or Caruana blunders mate in 3. That's fun to know as a fan, but it doesn't actually help your actual chess. So in today's video, I hope to share with you guys how I actually go over the latest games and how I try to, let's say, glean the most from it in terms of my own chess development. Alright, so let me switch my scene here. And here we go. Basically, I'm just going to use the same setup as I did last time. Here we have the notation, the moves of the game. Down here we have the engine evaluation. So, in the original video, I made a joke saying that you should only focus on the engine evaluation. That couldn't be further from the truth. I think what you really need to focus on is trying to understand why each move was played, and you should be trying to guess, what was going through the players' heads at the time of the game. Why did they choose each move that they did? When they do make a mistake, it's really useful to try and figure out what was going through their mind. Why did they make that mistake? That might actually be instructive for you. So, with that in mind, we're going to be focusing on the actual chess and on the actual chess moves, not so much on the engine. Now, the engine evaluation can be used as a tool. A lot of times it helps us deduce what was going on in the game. So you can use it as a tool, but I wouldn't focus on it. Okay, it's a big no-no. Alright, so here we have probably the main game of today's round. This is from the Grenki Chess Classic Super Tournament. And here we have Ho Yifan, who's leading the tournament 2 out of 2, playing against Magnus. I think a lot of people had their eyes on this game. So let's take a look at what happened, and hopefully I can share with you guys how I actually look over the games from today's best players. Alright, so e4, we have Sicilian. And so far all this is pretty standard. And Magnus plays the Najdorf. Now, for those of you who are familiar with Carlsen's opening repertoire, we know that he mainly plays e4, e5 in most of his games. But here he chooses the Sicilian on Najdorf, kind of indicates his intentions of getting a fighting game, trying to play for a win. And Ho Yifan played a4. As you can see, she spent 5 minutes on the move a4. Now, obviously, this isn't the first time she's seen the Najdorf in her career. This 5 minutes indicates that she was choosing between various lines and trying to figure out what would be the best approach here to play. Does that mean she was surprised by the Najdorf? Not necessarily. A lot of players, they get to a position and they choose which opening line they want to play based on how they're feeling, what they can remember about recent games, and all that stuff. Okay, now Magnus used 3 minutes and played e5. That means that a4 is a move he's definitely seen before. For those of you that know the Najdorf, it's definitely not the most common move. It's actually quite a serious sideline. So 3 minutes indicates that he was probably spending a bit of time trying to choose between various setups. Maybe he was choosing between e5. I imagine he was considering the move e6 as well, as this is a typical Najdorf move, right? Okay, so a4, e5, and knight f3 played quickly. One thing I want to mention here is that the clock times for this tournament, I believe, are pretty accurate, but they won't always be accurate, so you need to keep that in mind. If the clock times are completely off, then you're not going to be able to use them to try and figure out what's going through the players' heads. Alright, so bishop e7, bishop g5, bishop e6, takes. All this looks pretty normal so far. And both sides are just seemingly developing their pieces, and queen e2 played after 6 minutes. This seems like Hojafon is probably leaving, let's say, her opening preparation, right? Maybe she left it earlier, but I usually go by the clock times. If they're already spending 6 minutes, then usually that means they're thinking on their own. They're not trying to like remember analysis or anything like that. I mean, it is a pretty quiet position. There's not a whole lot of analysis one could even remember here anyways. And now Magnus spent 15 minutes on knight b6. Clearly this indicates he's out of his book as well, and he's starting to play chess. Alright, now Hojafon took the bishop, queen takes, and traded on e6, queen e6, castles, and now Magnus spent 18 minutes to castle. Now that I would say is maybe the first interesting moment, at least for me. A lot of this is going to be non-scientific. You're just kind of looking through the game and seeing what interests you. Castles to me looks like the most natural in the position. I don't think it took Magnus 18 moves to figure out that he could castle here, so he's probably thinking about something else. So I would try to figure out, okay, well, what other move was he considering here? Now, if you have a lot of time, I would suggest you do this process on your own. Look at the board, look for potential candidate moves, and try to figure out what else he was considering. But let's say we're on a short schedule here, then you can use the engine and figure out, okay, what other moves make sense. So the engine here indicates queen c4, castles knight d7. Based on my subjective evaluation, I think knight d7 makes sense in order to reroute the knight. Queen c4 also makes a lot of sense. Maybe he was considering a queen trade. If they do trade queens, then we know from our experience that the king doesn't always have to castle. It can go to e7. So maybe that's what was going through his mind. Maybe that's the decision he's trying to make. Okay, so he ended up castling, rook fd1, and rook c6. Again, if you have more time, I would suggest to consider each move a little bit longer than I'm doing right now. Here I'm just kind of giving you the quick approach. If you don't have a lot of time, but you do want to see the latest games, this is what I'd be doing. a5 was played, knight d7, b3, rook c8, rook d2, knight c5, rook a d1, queen e7. Based on the computer evaluation, it seems like black has equalized, and based on my own evaluation of the position, I feel like black is pretty comfortable here as well. He's got his rooks nicely developed, his lone weakness on d6 is protected, and the main thing for me is that this knight on f3 is very far away from the d5 square, where if it was placed there, it would be a really strong piece. So queen e3 was played, g6, g3, and b5. So Magnus is gaining some space on the queen side, white takes, rook d5, and here we can see that the computer evaluation has gone up. So I think here's where maybe things got confusing in the original April Fool's video. In fact, when the computer evaluation does change, that does indicate an interesting moment. I mean, that does mean that something has happened. One side is getting an advantage, someone made a mistake, something of that nature. So you do want to focus on this moment. Now the key here is to figure out why the player allowed this, right? It's not just about knowing, oh, Magnus allowed white to get a big advantage. It's trying to figure out not only what happened, but what would have been a better move and why would it be a better move. This is what's actually going to improve your chess understanding. So before we get to that, let's look at what black should have done instead of this move b5, because apparently this was a small mistake. So the computer gives 3 suggestions here: queen c7, knight d7, knight e6. To me, it seems like the computer is happy with any move other than pushing b5. Maybe it's evaluating the fact that black makes a weakness for himself on meaning the a6 pawn. Not really sure what's going on through the computer's head, but let's try to analyze the position a little bit, if not for this b5 move. To me, the move knight e6 looks really natural. Just putting the knight on e6 where it can eventually jump to d4, opening up the rooks on the c file, and for some reason or another, the game is balanced. Now it's not clear exactly what's the difference, so let's go through the game and figure out what exactly is the difference in the positions. So b5 was played, takes, and rook d5. And now black played rook c6, which admittedly looks a little bit awkward. Okay, so what would be wrong with the move knight e6 that the computer was suggesting earlier? Oh, the rook on b6 is just hanging. I actually didn't see that at first, so the computer just points that out for me. So the knight here is pinned to the rook, so black can't make this regrouping knight e6. Okay, well, what about bringing the rook back to c6 and then putting the knight to e6? What happens now? Aha, the position is equal except for this move knight d2. So this is, I guess, the critical reply. And let's say black plays knight e6. Knight c4 looks like the most natural move. And knight d4, why not? And the computer is giving white a small edge here. And what's interesting to me is that, okay, rook d2 is seen as the best move, but rook takes d4, exchange sacrifice, also seems to be giving white some advantage. So that looks like the most interesting line to me, so let's look at that. Takes, takes, queen takes, and seems like white has a small edge, 0.4, 0.5, nothing huge, but we did sacrifice an exchange, so it seems like this position is definitely better for white. Whether I would evaluate this way in a real game, I'm not sure, but it is an interesting position to me, and it's interesting that the computer likes white here, even though we know computers are usually going to be pretty materialistic. But I kind of get it. You know, the rook, the knight, the queen, they're all very nicely centralized and compact, controlling a lot of squares, and black has some weaknesses, d6 and a6. I totally get why white would be better here. So that, to me, is actually instructive. Now, if I was really in serious training mode, I would maybe even analyze a little bit further, but in the interest of time, let's go on with the game. So, rook c6, knight d2, and knight b7. So now it seems like black's pieces are kind of going backward, and seems like white is definitely in full control over the position. So Hou-Yifan definitely has a serious advantage here. Okay, knight c4 was played, rook b5, and queen a7. Nice move, just going in with the queen. Queen c7, and now white took on b5, a takes b5, and knight takes d6. So we see here the evaluation is dropping a little bit. Well, let's see how the game continued, and then we'll go back and figure out how white could have kept the advantage. So knight d6 was played, queen c7, rook takes c7, rook d6, rook takes c2. So we get this single rook endgame where it seems like white is a bit better, but thanks to this move rook e2, black is able to hold. So we took the pawn on e5 and b4. Now white is a pawn up, but it's pretty clear to me that black's next move is going to be rook to b2 and take the b3 pawn. And if white plays rook b5 as in the game, black can win back the pawn with rook takes e4. And from here, it seems like the players repeated moves after rook e4, king g2, rook d4, king f1, and a draw was agreed. Now a lot of players would just kind of stop there and say, oh, okay, just equal rook endgame, they agreed to a draw. But looking at the position, I'm thinking, well, let's see. She plays king f1 to try and get the king in, so Magnus puts the rook on e4. And then after king g2, he puts the rook back on d4. So why can't white make progress with the move king f3? Aha, rook d3 check, and black wins the b3 pawn, so clearly there's not going to be any winning chances here for white. So, okay, of course I saw rook d3 check, I just wanted you guys to see it and to show you the computer pointing it out as well. So king f3 is met with rook d3 check, king f1 as in the game is met with rook e4. So for that reason, white can't really make any progress in this position, and so they agree to a draw. Now that to me is actually instructive, right? It's not interesting to know that the computer is just saying equal. What's interesting is to know why the players agree to a draw. Okay, so let's go back to that critical moment where Hou-Yifan seems to have given away her advantage, right here. It seems like this move rook takes b5 was where white is giving up the advantage. After a takes b5, already it's dropped to 0.6, which is not that significant, and knight takes d6 just leads to this drawn rook endgame. So better here would have been knight e3. And then after black plays knight c5, we take on c7, rook takes c7, rook takes d6, knight takes e4, and it seems like the evaluation has gone down again, so the computer thinks that black is going to be able to hold in this endgame. Okay, so that tells me that let's say the real mistake, if we can call it that, was this move rook takes b5. So let's see what was better. Okay, so one idea was just to go back with the rook to d2, kind of keeping the position. But the clear best move is apparently h4. Now h4 is a natural move just to kind of gain space on the king side, just to tell black, okay, your move, what are you going to do? I want to push h5 and maybe get my pawn to h6. But what if black just plays h5? How does white make progress in the position? Right? Just because we have a better position doesn't mean that we're necessarily going to be able to win. So now the computer is suggesting this move rook a1. Alright, let's play rook a1. Seems like we want to take the pawn on a6. And black has only one way not to lose immediately, this move rook b4. So let's follow the computer line. Rook d2 is possible, but I want to see what happens after rook takes a6. Here's another point I need to mention. We don't always have to follow the top computer choice. I think you should use your own ideas and try to figure out what move you think suggests itself. Here it seems natural to just take the pawn on a6. So now computer is saying that the only suggestion here for black not to lose immediately is to take the knight on c4. If black just trades rooks, we take, and white has won a pawn, and we can see the d6 pawn is about to fall as well, and we can see the evaluation. White is winning. Okay, so let's go back. So after rook a6, black has to sacrifice the exchange. We take on c4. Rook b1 check, only move. King h2. And queen takes c4. And in this position, it's interesting that only one move, rook a1, keeps white's advantage. Against all other moves, apparently black is getting enough counterplay, either with queen takes e4 or queen f1. So rook a1 is the only move here for white to keep his advantage. Black is then obliged to trade rooks one way or the other. Perhaps takes the pawn on c2 or maybe knight c5, so black has some options here. But the position is kind of stabilized. White is up in exchange. Black has some compensation though because he can attack c2, e4, the knight is coming to c5. But all in all, I don't think anyone would dispute that white has an advantage here. Maybe some players would even claim that white is winning. I'm not personally strong enough to make that assessment, but clearly white has a big edge. So let's analyze what happened. So the first thing that I think of is that this move rook a1 is probably hard to see in the calculation. Next thing I'm thinking of is this move h4. Why was this move so necessary? So let's go back here. Let's play the move rook a1 and see what happens. Well, black plays rook b4. And now rook takes a6 is not even a suggestion here. So rook takes a6. Rook takes c4. Now the computer is saying equal. Let's see why. B takes c4. Rook b1 check. King g2. Queen takes c4. And now I think we can start to realize why this is such an improvement for black over the other line. Here the king is on g2 and black is already threatening queen f1 check, queen takes c4 check. Black has a ton of counterplay here. In fact, only one move for white, rook d3, is even keeping the game balanced. So we can see why Huifan wouldn't want to go into this position. Black is getting a ton of counterplay here, and it's white who has to be accurate not to run into troubles with the king. So here's what the computer analyzed in a matter of seconds. White plays the move h4. Right there. Black has nothing better than to play h5. And now in the same variation, white can put the king on h2. Whoops, we're going to take on c4 here. Put the king on h2, and black doesn't get the same counterplay with the queen. Well, they kind of do, but thanks to this move rook a1, white is able to extinguish the initiative and go into this endgame where we're up in exchange. Note that black doesn't have queen f1 check here and win the rook on a1 as they would in the other line. So now I feel like we're kind of getting somewhere in terms of figuring out what exactly happened. Judging based on all these moves, it'd be pretty hard to see that, oh, if you play h4 first, then you have this square on h2 for your king, and then you'll have this resource rook a1. I imagine that Huifan probably considered this move rook a1, saw that black is getting some, sorry, gotta fix my setup here, saw that black is getting a ton of counterplay and didn't want to go into this. So I'm guessing she probably didn't consider h4, h5, and then king h2. My own subjective evaluation of these moves is that these are pretty hard to find, even for a very strong player. Now, if you really want to get inside the players' minds, I think the best approach would be to watch the postmortem and see what they say about the game. But they don't always go into all the details about the position. Usually they focus on one or two critical moments, and they don't always talk about every single decision they made. So this kind of analysis is a lot more instructive for you because you can see move by move what are the differences are between each line. And you can use the computer, but as you can see, we're using it as a tool to help us figure out what happened in the game. It's not the end-all be-all of evaluation. All right, well, we'll wrap up there. Hopefully you guys found it instructive as to how to actually go over a game so that it's useful for you and your chess. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments and I'll try to answer them. And until next time, this was Kostya. Take care, guys.